Hey guys, I'm Matt Hernandez. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to use a hair light. Okay, so welcome back everybody. As you can see, we are not in my nice studio that I pay rent for. We are in my garage. And the reason we're in my garage is because I know a lot of people can't afford or don't want a big fancy studio. Maybe you do it for a hobby, or you're not to the point where you can afford a studio yet. So I wanted to show everybody that this doesn't have to be done in a place like that. You can make it work at your house. So we're in our detached garage. We have an X-Drop Pro with a black background, and we've got two lights. And I'm going to show you how to use a hair light. When I sat down and tried to think of simple, easy things that people might look for on YouTube, I realized that I shoot with edge lights all the time. I use one light a lot, but I also use 2 and 3. And I use edge lights in a lot of different ways. So I'm actually going to do a series on these. And today, the first one is how to use a hair light. So I've got the most beautiful model that I could possibly have. My wife has agreed to help us today. So we're going to take a headshot of her. I also realized that people want the cheapest gear possible most of the time. Not everybody can afford to do an 8-light setup like I've done videos on in the past. While those are cool and the pictures turn out really neat, I think there's a lot to be said for things that are more cost effective also. So we've got an FJ200 as our key light. We have an Octa L as the modifier, just on a regular 8-foot stand, nothing fancy. I do have a C-stand with a boom arm for the hair light behind her, about 45 degrees. So this will work. This would have worked with a regular stand also. And initially I had it directly behind her. That's why I thought I needed the boom arm. And after playing with it a little bit, we've got an FJ80 on that light also. I didn't want to use a big softbox or anything like that, or a big strip box. Those are more expensive. Like I said, I was trying to keep it as cheap as possible. So we wouldn't have to have a boom to move it to the side like I have it here. Now, if it was directly behind her, then you would obviously, or you could put it behind the background just on a regular stand. But because we're in the garage, or if you were in your house with lower ceilings, you might not be able to make that work. So that's where the boom would come in handy. I just kept it on there just because I didn't want to change the stands out, but we could have just used a regular stand for that. So a lot of times I'll use the FJ400. That is my favorite light. It has a battery that lasts a long time. I think it's 400 plus flashes at full power. They are a little bit more expensive, 400 watt seconds. The FJ200 is a great alternative to that. It's 200 watt seconds, which is, I guess, technically half power from the FJ400, but don't let that deceive you because it's actually only 1 stop less power. So if you went down to 8 out of 9 on your FJ400, that would equal full power on the FJ200. A lot of people don't realize that. I don't know why they measure watt seconds so oddly like that, but that is the way that it works. But this light is significantly cheaper. You can't plug it in while you're shooting. There is a trade-off there for the cost, but it's still a great light. It's super portable and small. It's about the same size as the 70-200, so you can put it in your light bag really easy. So we're using that and it does have the rapid box speed ring, but it is a little bit smaller. So you would have to buy a different speed ring. It doesn't take the FJ400. That's something to keep in mind also. And I'll put links to all these products that I'm using, all the gear that I'm using down below in the description if you guys want to check it out later. Okay, so the main thing here is I want to show you what the hair light does and why you would use it. So I've got my A1, my Sony A1 70-200. We've got the FJ X3S remote, which is Sony specific, that we're shooting with. I'm going to shoot shallow. I shoot shallow. Most of my portraits shallow, and I even do that with headshots too, just because I like to fall off on the side. You have to make sure you get the eyes in focus, obviously, so you've got to watch that. But we're going to be going tight. That shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so I'm going to take a shot of the ambient first, just so you can see. That's what I always start with. I want to make sure that we get it dark in here because we have a black background. Headshots, when I take headshots, I typically want them to be on white, gray, or black. The reason is because it's about the person's face. That's what you're focusing on. So you don't want a distracting background. It's going to be a nice tight shot anyway. So typically a solid neutral color like that's going to work really well because it'll go with anything that they have on. So I wanted my wife specifically to do this video, not just because she's beautiful, but because she has black hair. So I thought that was a great opportunity to show what happens when you shoot a headshot with somebody on a black background that also has dark or black hair. That's where the hair light is going to come in, to give some separation from the background and just so you see a little bit more detail on the back side where the light's not hitting. So let's take an ambient shot first. So what I'm going for here isn't necessarily totally dark, but because the background's black, I do want the ambient to be pretty non-existent, close to being close to being black. So we're going to start out at, and I'm just guessing here, just from experience, 1/250th f8 ISO 100, and then I did a custom white balance too, which I'll probably show on a different video, which is really good for things like headshots when you're not going to be moving around. Just because flash white balance, which I use a lot on portrait shoots, can be a little bit inconsistent sometimes and tends to be a little bit warm. So on a headshot, you want to make sure that you get your color right. So I'll do a video on that at a different time. But okay, so we're going to take a shot here first, just to see what this looks like with the ambient. So I've got on my remote, the great thing about these is you can turn the lights, you can put them to sleep. So we're not going to have them fire right now. So we're going to start out those settings. Okay, and then that looks exactly like I want it to. I can see a little bit of the overhead light hitting her shirt because it's lighter, but for the most part, that's pretty black. Let's talk about the light position real quick first before I move on. We have the Octa-L, nice big light source. I've said it before. The bigger the light source and the closer the light source, the softer the light's going to be. This is a headshot, so you want it to look, you want her to look as pretty as possible. You want it to be nice and soft. So I've got the big modifier fairly close to her, about 45 degrees, angled down, about 45 degrees. She likes this side better, so I've got her turned to her left, angled towards the light, okay? Because again, headshots are about the person's face, so we're not trying to be super creative. We're just trying to get a nice picture of her to put on her business cards for real estate or whatever she's doing. Okay, so we've got both layers of diffusion in also, and it's probably about, I'd say maybe 2 feet from her, so it's pretty close, just out of frame. First frame is black, so now we're gonna build the set from the background up, like I always explain. That's the best way to do it. So I've got the FJ200, the key light set to group A, channel 11, the hair light set to group B on channel 11. So I've got them both to sleep, so I'm just gonna click this side button here and turn it back on. Okay, I can see it's lit up now. Now I do also have the grid that comes with the FJ80, and also I will say that that's the older version of Westcott Speedlight. They have a FJ82 out now that has, I think, better, I don't know if it has better battery life, but I know it has faster recycle time, doesn't overheat as much. That's still a great on-camera flash or speed light to use off camera, but they do have an updated version of it too. Okay, but it works just the same as the other lights that goes in the ecosystem. The Westcott ecosystem can be controlled by the remote here. So we've got that on, and I've got it turned. I did some test shots beforehand, so I already knew my settings. People ask me what settings I set my light. I start out with my lights. Honestly, you get your exposure first with the settings you want on your camera for the depth of field and the shutter speed, and then you turn your lights on and you adjust the power based on what you need. That's how I do it. So it doesn't really matter. So we're gonna start out, and that's at 6.5 out of 9. Okay, so we're just gonna take a shot here. Horizontal, zoomed in real tight. Okay, so you can see what the hair light's doing by itself. The reason I didn't have it directly behind her, I do this a lot with a strip box, with the FJ400 as a hair light, because it's softer, because it has 2 layers of diffusion, and it spreads it out a little bit more because it's a longer strip box. They have 1x3s and 1x4s, I use both of them. And those, like I said, spread the light out more. So this is a smaller light source. It's going to be harsher. It's a hair light, so it doesn't matter as much, but it's also smaller. And it's round, so it's not going to spread out quite as much. It's still, as you can see, going to hit her shoulders and the back of her head. But when I put it directly behind her, it made a hot spot right on her crown of her head, and we didn't necessarily want that. Okay, so we've got that good. Now I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to turn. I've got the modeling lamp on here. Just because it's a little bit darker in this garage, I want to make sure that I get focus. If you have low ambient, these cameras do a great job focusing still, but you don't want to. I don't want to take any chances with a headshot. So I'm going to turn the modeling light on and make sure that that helps you grab focus before you shoot. Because sometimes it's easy to miss that. You think something's in focus and it's not. You get back on the computer, that's the worst, because you can't go back and reshoot it. Or you could maybe go reshoot it, but you don't want to have to, obviously. Okay, so we've got Group B off, Group A on. All right, ready? So let me let you see what this looks like. Oh, thank you, blinked, honey. Put a little bit more hair in front. That's one thing too, a bonus tip here about posing with women. So when she's angled this way, camera right, put your hair back on this side. So what'll happen is when the shoulder that's furthest away from you, when you put the hair back on that side, a lot of times it tends to kind of like droop down, right? And that doesn't necessarily look good. It doesn't stay back all the way. It doesn't look as good, I don't think, a lot of times wrapped around. So I'll either have them put the front shoulder back to see the neckline or put both sides in front, but I don't hardly ever do it like that because you can see her hair was already starting to droop down a little bit. So we've got it back in front, so we could put this side back or leave it in front. But if you're going to put it in front, you want to have a decent amount of hair. You don't want just like a little bit. It's not going to look as good. Okay. All right, so let's take a test shot here with just the key light, the Octa. Good. Okay. All right, that looks great. Okay, so we're using Rembrandt lighting here also as another side bonus tip here. That's the painter Rembrandt used to paint like that, where the light source would come from about 45 degrees one side, which is going to make shadow, obviously where the light's not hitting, but it causes, sorry, hit her on the nose, a triangle, a pocket of light right here. So that's why it's called Rembrandt lighting, because it's named after him. Okay, all right, so you can see that looks really great. Her hair is lit where the light's hitting it. Obviously it's brighter, there's highlights, but the back side of her is going into the black background. So you kind of lose where the back of her head is, which is why the whole point of using the hair light. So let's turn that on. So the main light is at 5.5 out of 9, and the hair light is at 6.5, which that really, these lights don't have the same power. So you kind of have to eyeball it to see what you want. I don't use a light meter. I've actually thought about maybe trying to start using one just so things are a little bit quicker maybe. I usually just eyeball things. You have to watch edge lights though, whether it's a hair light or something or anything else, because if you have it too bright, it might look cool on the back of the camera, but if there's no highlights, or if the highlights are blown out, and you got to look real closely and zoom in, because if they're blown out, you can't get them back. And a lot of people blow out their edge lights. So we want to make sure that you can still see detail even though it's lighting them up from the back, from the edge. Okay. So let's turn them both on now and show them what that looks like. All right, ready? Is that a real smile? Or you, there you go, good. I've got a lot of corny jokes that I use. That's one of them. You always gotta be ready when you use those though, because you don't wanna miss it. Okay. All right, so you can see so you can see the difference there. Exactly the same shot, the only difference is the hair light. That really adds a whole lot of separation. You can see detail, you can see where her hair stops and the background begins, where otherwise you wouldn't be able to. So the first way is not bad. If you only have one light, that shows you that you can definitely pull off headshots that way. And you know, with her, you could have used a gray background, maybe that way you don't have to light it. White, you'd probably have to light. So you've got to make that decision yourself. It depends on what your budget is. Okay, that's it. Really short and sweet today. Hope everybody enjoyed it, got something out of it. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you would hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell so that you know when I post new videos. There's going to be a lot more to come, and stay tuned for more in this series on edge lights. We'll see you next time.